Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers! Happy birthday to
you! Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. So often, I talk about how to grow, add, or deepen our friendships. But sometimes we just need to let it go, whether that is letting go of an entire friendship or perhaps just an aspect of it. My guest today is Emily Rogers. Emily is a transition and leadership coach and the host of the Leap to Lead podcast, which I was a guest on, by the way. Link in the show notes. Emily herself has lived overseas for 20 plus years, and she has personally navigated many moves and transitions. So I think it's safe to say she's quite practiced in how a big life shift can impact your connections, which is why today she helps corporations and their teams navigate as they transition to living abroad for their careers. With each transition comes new connections, but it also requires a spring cleaning of sorts of our past connections. Where does our energy go? Now, sometimes we might spring clean an entire friendship from our wheel of connection, but many times we can just spring clean an aspect of a friendship. Maybe the ways we connect with that person, the topics we talk about, or our expectations. In doing so, we can allow that friendship to shift into its new form and honestly, maybe even thrive in its new form. All of us are experiencing transitions constantly. Moves, new jobs, adding to our families, finding love, ending a relationship, grief. And that's just the big ones. There are so many other little transitions happening in our day-to-day. Today's episode will help you navigate the impact those transitions have on your connections with more grace and intention. So let's dive in. Hi, Emily. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this. I think it's a really interesting topic.
Oh, I mean, me too.
I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
No. I mean, you're not jumping ahead. I was just laughing yeah, I'm slightly obsessed with this topic. So I just talk about it all day with anybody who will listen. Open up my microphone, record, but I'm so excited that you're here. And this is a topic that you actually talk about in your work.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
You work in the HR leadership space.
I'm a transition and leadership coach. So my background was human resources and I've moved into the coaching space because of my life circumstances, like most of us do. And I work with organizations now and support them when they're moving people across countries, because that was my life for 12 years, moving around Asia. And so I actually run this as a workshop. So when I connected with you, I was like, we have to do this.
Yeah, we got to record it. We got to put it out there for more people to hear, because I think it's such an important topic. Like today, we're going to talk about this idea of spring cleaning your friends. And after initially talking to you, I'm just so interested in your take. And let me tell you why. Because I record with a number of expats. And there's this really interesting pull when you're an expat between trying to make new community and balance what's at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a lot of expats on here talk about the fact that you're never really fully in one place.
Mm.
And so because of that, because you're being pulled both ways, I think it's really understandable that it accelerates this need to analyze where your energy is going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But just because that's something that you need as an expat, you need as somebody who has moved because their corporation has moved them across the world.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean everybody doesn't need this. It's just that it's accelerated this process or made it more necessary because somebody's moved. Like, I think this applies to everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter whether you are moving towns, moving states, moving countries, or staying put. We go through transitions in life as well. And so it could be that you've finished school, you're going to college, or you're getting your first job, or you're getting married. All these life transitions impact us. So transition is not just moving physically, it is life transitions as well. And it comes in with all of those life transitions.
I mean, ones that were going through my head were starting a family,
yes,
getting a new romantic relationship, moving to a new job or to a new industry. Honestly, just, I mean, people leaving a faith.
Any transition,
having a medical emergency that has a lifelong impact. Like, we're all going through so many transitions.
Yeah. And transition is change. So any shift in life. Think of it that way. When we talk about transitions, we're talking about a shift in your life.
There's not a single person listening to this podcast who hasn't probably gone through a couple this year, whether they're big or small, and maybe even more than a couple. Like, we can have a lot of shifts all the time, and that definitely impacts our friendships. I like to say that with each one of those transitions, we become a slightly new version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And then when we're a new version of ourselves in a relationship, it's work to shift that. And although I talk a lot about doing the work, because I do think that sometimes we cut it off a little prematurely, 100%, there are many, many times where maybe you just either shouldn't do the work, don't have capacity to do the work, don't want to do the work, and that's all valid.
And I think if you think about transition being a shift in your life, if you think about that and then think about whenever something shifts, you need to realign. So, you think about your car, you get your wheels realigned, it fixes everything for your car. So if you shift something in your life, you need to realign things. And friends is a huge part of that. Relationships are a huge part of that realignment. And you've obviously talked a lot about putting in that work and making those connections and finding them. But if something's changing for you, then recognizing that that's going to have an external impact as well is really, really important.
One of the things that I think is most interesting about friendship, actually, is that it's a relationship we choose that doesn't have a predefined end goal necessarily, right? When you get married, you have some sense of what your new responsibilities are to this person, how you are connected. If you don't want to follow those kind of predefined expectations, then you have a conversation in which you say, like, hey, I know that a lot of people join finances. I don't want to do that. And you discuss that. You don't do that in friendship. And yet in friendship, when you make a life choice, it impacts that relationship just like any other. But you're not, quite often, not making those life choices together.
And I think we're sort of getting into it now, but I think the key is, and you touched on it, recognizing the energy and recognizing when it's not right. And because we're not having those conversations, because we're not setting it up the same way when it comes to friendship, then there is this sort of undertone of assumption. And we all know what assumption means. It's the acronym for an ask out of you and me. So if we're assuming these things, then we're setting ourselves up for a risk. So recognize that shifts are happening in your life, transitions are happening in your life. You've got to realign yourself. And then when something's not feeling right, the energy's not right, then don't assume their experience is the same as yours. Don't assume, because you're not having these conversations, because it's not a marriage. It's not.
You could have these conversations.
You could.
And I advocate for that, actually. like have the conversation. But some people aren't going to do that.
No. And I think when it comes to friendships, if it's been a long-term friendship, then you might. I think back to the friends that I made, at school that I'm still connected with. There's conversations that we have that I'm not going to have with someone that I met on our last posting in Taiwan, for example. Like, it is different, and recognizing how you're coming at that friendship.
Yes.
But I think tuning into you and tuning into your own internal shifts and understanding that it's okay to shift and to have a realignment. Your values might be shifting. For example, if you're getting married, or if you're starting a family, or maybe you're at the other end of life and you're an empty nester, your values will shift as well. And knowing that it's okay to realign yourself each time. And I guess this is one thing I work with my clients as well. We're not answering, who I am forever. This is for this period of my life as well, and what makes sense right now. And being okay to realign that. I'm making sense. You're not.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. You're totally making sense. I say this, I just recorded another episode actually earlier today, and we had all these conversations about like what feels right now. Give yourself permission that it may not feel right 6 months from now, 1 year from now. I mean, heck, even 1 month from now, it might feel right. And then you might try it and be like, oh, just kidding. This does not feel right.
Exactly. And I work with, as I said, people moving countries. I run this workshop with organizations, and we talk about the first 6 to 8 months. Say yes to everything. Just go to everything. Turn down no invitation. Put yourself out there. If you're introverted, find the ways that make it work for you. Just do it. But there is a point at about 6 to 8 months where you can take that step back and start to assess and recalibration, that realignment that we've been talking about, and understanding that you've shifted now. You're there, you're in place, all that stuff of the initial phase has happened, and this is now my new life. And understanding that it's probably at that point that you need to understand the energy levels. An example, because I think I'm talking around it now. You might move and you meet a group of people, and you've just arrived. They're already, 4 or 5 people that are friends, and you're joining the group. And you get along generally really well as a group. You do some things that you like, go for a walk, go for coffees, whatever it is. And then you end up having a one-on-one with one of them, or at different times you end up having one-on-one conversations. If people are saying negative things about what's happening around them, if people are saying negative things about their own relationships, if they're coming at things from a negative point of view all the time, you'll notice it's draining on your energy.
Yeah.
It's draining from you. And when you leave that conversation, or you leave that engagement, that experience, you sort of feel this weight on you. And my mum has a way of talking about, you've got to de-slime yourself. You've got to really shake it off.
I like that.
So you literally have to recognize that actually that encounter wasn't a very positive experience, and I now need to physically move myself to shake that off, or be conscious that actually that's not who I am. That's not my experience. I'm not in that space, and letting it go in a mental way, or doing something to physically separate yourself from those experiences.
Yeah, you might find at the end of that conversation, another sign would be like they start talking about the next time you're going to hang out or get together, and you're in your head being like, oh, do I have to do that?
And if you're feeling that internal dread, then this is not someone who's good for you.
That's a sign you've been slimed.
Thank you, Mum. That's how you've been slimed.
You don't want to keep being slimed. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to identify with this. Like, energy is so important when you're with people, and it doesn't always align. And I think that there's this huge piece of, I would imagine, especially actually with your clients, when you move, sometimes people are a little desperate. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, when your whole world has been rocked a little bit for whatever reason, support and connection is so foundational, whether most people want to admit it or not, that your need just feels high. And sometimes people will settle for connection, even though they're getting slimed every time.
Yeah, exactly. And you do, especially if you're in a big shift in your own life. So maybe you've got married, and maybe you're meeting, spending time with your new husband's or your new partner's friends or something. There could be reasons why you're forced into this situation where you're having to spend time together. And if you're always getting slimed, if you're always getting that experience, then it can be really, really undermining to you as well. And that's when you have to go, okay, I need to spring clean here, and I need to just take a step back, and I need to shift something.
So talk to us about the process of spring cleaning.
The first part is, as we've talked, recognizing when it's happening. And in my wealth of experience of moving often, it's usually someone whose personal values don't align with yours. The way that they want to spend their time doesn't align with yours. The way that they are raising their children doesn't align with yours, whatever it is. For whatever reason, their values don't align. And so when you spend time together, it's hard to get into sync.
Yeah.
It feels draining. And as the other example I use, someone who's always negative about what's happening in their life or around them. It's hard when you spend time with those people to get into sync. So then you step away and you can physically shake, you can mentally distance, whatever. But you have to find a way to actually spring clean it. You have to find a way to say, actually, this doesn't work for me. And it's going to be different and dependent on who it is. So if it's your husband's best friend's wife, then it's not going to be we need to just put some space between us. It's going to be, how can we make this work so I'm not impacted by you every time we spend time together? And that's where a conversation potentially with your new partner to outline how you're feeling and how it impacts you. Okay, when we spend time with this couple, we need to make sure there's a third couple in the mix as well.
Or you can't just go off on your own.
Yes.
The entire time. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's ways that you can mitigate it. And, I gave the example of when you arrive at a new place and you meet a group of friends, then, you're joining the group. Then just make sure you're not one-on-one with that person. You can still be part of the group. You can still know them. You can still be there, but don't have that one-on-one engagement. And that is quite easy to manage. If you like the group, then you just make sure there's always other people around. And it might be that you're the only one who has that experience with person A, and the others actually don't have the same experience. So it's easy to put a little bit of space in there as well. Spring clean is probably not the right word, but it was a term that was used to me. I moved from Australia to New Zealand, and I got off the phone from an old friend, that's someone I'd known for a long time. And I hung up the phone. I just laid there on the floor. My flatmate came home. She said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I just got off the phone." And she said, "Oh, Rogers," she said, "you can spring clean your friends." And so it's a term that's stuck with me since then. And it's really about understanding, how can I change this dynamic? How can I separate myself from this person to, I guess, empower myself to find joy in the relationships I have?
I love what you're saying, because people are going to hear spring clean and they're going to think, cut people off their list. And there is 100% a time and a place to do that. And do it. But there are also ways to mitigate the problem without leaving yourself high and dry. Like you were using the example of your partner's best friend, significant other, inviting the other couple. Another one that comes to mind would be saying to your partner, hey, if we're going to hang out with that couple, we need to go do an activity.
Yes, exactly.
We need to do something where everybody isn't sitting around a table being forced to just talk the entire time, where we can all, bowl together and talk about the bowling. Because then there's less focus on me having to just talk to this one person. Also, don't just leave me all night. You have to partake in the group conversation.
There was a group that I started in Chongqing. Chongqing is way out west in China. Biggest city in the world. No one's ever heard of it. And we started this group, and we would meet once a week on a Wednesday morning after school drop, and we would go and explore a different part of the city. And there was one particular person who was just really negative, really, really negative about where we were living, about the people, about everything. You can't cut people out. Sometimes you can't. I know there's absolutely a case for doing it, and we can talk about that in a moment, but sometimes you just can't. You're a small community, or it's a new workplace, and you can't just cut them out. You have to find a way forward. And activity is absolutely going to be a buffer. It's a great way to protect yourself. And even if you have to do it one-on-one, it's a brilliant way to create space, because you're talking about what's happening around you and not all those other values things.
And you might actually find that can be a connection point, Maybe you
Yes.
both really like bowling, and that's honestly something you talk about when you are stuck at that table together. As silly as that sounds, like that is a way to protect your own energy, is knowing this is just what we talk about. We don't need to go further than this. That's okay. And, like that's what it is. I was
Yeah.
going to say another example I have experienced is like in a group setting is sometimes, especially in maybe a very connected group, like a group that gets everybody, it can be frustrating when you feel like somebody just doesn't care as much and wishing they did, and having to have this conversation with yourself and be like, they just don't. And they may never. And I could continue to be frustrated about that, or I could just spring clean my expectation, basically, that is how they're going to show up, and let it go.
And knowing that and acknowledging it, as you said, gives you the power.
Mm-hmm.
You're not then being drawn into that negative space because you're separating yourself from it. So you're literally, back to mums, de-slamming. You're saying, okay, well, that's who you want to be. That's how you want to do it. I'm over here. I'm not you. And it comes back to that circle of control, the circle of concern. You can't control other people. You can't control their behaviors. You can't control their values, what they're going to say, what they're going to do. Your thoughts, your actions, that's where you can control it. And so maybe you don't extend the invitation to that person every time you've got something happening, but there are ways you can just make it a more comfortable existence for everybody.
I would agree with that. I've experienced exactly what you're talking about.
And coming back to that circle of concern and circle of control, if you can use that, anyone who wants to read more about it, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
I have that book right over here. Yeah.
If you can bring it back into your circle of control, no matter what's going on in your world, then you are empowered. You have choice. You have control. You can make a decision. Actually, you're not good for me. I'm just going to put this space between us. And as you said, there are absolutely times when you should not foster a relationship in any way, shape, or form. If someone's degrading to other people and that's not your space, then there's no reason to foster that relationship. There is no reason to be in a space that's not yours. And so literally just don't invite them. You don't have to respond to every message you get. What's the word they use now? Ghost them? I don't think you really want to ghost people, but it's not very fair to the other person.
Well, doesn't sound like they're a very kind person anyway, so.
And probably they're not going to notice, because if they're that sort of person, when you think of the classic bully at school, they're mean, they attack other people, they behave in a way that's unwelcome socially. If you start distancing yourself from them, are they really going to notice? They're so wrapped up in their own world. Their ego is so inflated, they're probably not going to notice anyway that you go, actually, I don't like you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I mean, I know bullies then pick on people more, but the ego comes into it is what I'm trying to say. And they're not necessarily going to notice if you're distancing yourself from someone who is that extreme, not right for me.
How have I released almost 90 episodes and I haven't released this one yet? I'm sorry. This is an important episode. Why have I made you wait so long for this? This should have been way further up in my queue. There's a couple things I want to touch on here. Number one is I'm just so grateful that we're talking about letting go. I think that there are a lot more messages out there in the world right now about letting go of bad friendships, toxic friendships, all those buzzwords. So that's why I focus so much of my energy on talking about adding or growing, because I do think a lot of people need that. But that's not to say that we don't also need to let go. And especially in the way that Emily and I are talking about, where it's not that we necessarily always need to cut out an entire friendship. It might just be that we need to cut out a part of a friendship or a connection. Because I really do believe that when we let go, we can create space for this connection to breathe and flourish in its new form, because it's the most honest form. The other thing I want to note is if you have not listened to episode 12, you should go listen to it. As I'm listening back to this episode, to Emily and I's conversation, I can't stop thinking about how important my roots of friendship framework is. As I'm listening to us talk, I'm like, oh, that's a shared experience root. That's an emotional intimacy root. That's a story root. And I really do believe when you have this framework, it makes it easier to do this reflection and to kind of analyze what's going on. And instead of just kind of feeling like you're setting these random or arbitrary boundaries or letting go of certain things, like you understand why. So I really would suggest you go to episode 12. And hopefully a listen or two to that will help you start to see this framework in your own life. Like there are 3 roots. And as we're going, as Emily's talking about, maybe you only go bowling with someone, I'm like, that is limiting shared experience roots. As we're talking about maybe not being left alone in a conversation with a partner's coworker, I'm like, oh, we are limiting or letting go of emotional intimacy roots. When I was telling my story about letting go of some expectations in a community connection I have that they were going to show up and ask me a bunch of questions about my life, I was able to let go of this expectation and this belief that they really want to know a bunch of details about my life besides just kind of existing in this community space together, which allows me to let go of a story root. Like I said, go listen to episode 12 because I think it gives all of us a framework to start looking at our connections in a new light. I think that, there's lots of boundaries is a very big buzzword out there. So much of boundaries is actually like us upholding our own boundaries. Like, if you do this thing, I will leave. That's a boundary, right? And I think so much of that is then you're talking about control, like in our control of saying, you are making this an unsafe space for other people. I have no interest in that. Therefore, I am going to leave. Similarly, I think we can control quite often our expectations. And that comes back to that checking in. Because I think quite often, especially in friendships or work relationships or connections, we don't really think about the expectations we have of other people. And then when they don't meet our expectations, we're really upset or frustrated or whatnot. Going back to that thing I was saying earlier of just deciding they're never going to be that person and letting it go. And therefore, can you just exist in this space? Now, not if they're a bully and harming others, that's different. But if they're just not really your energy, then don't put a lot of effort in. Enjoy the other relationships that you have around you.
Will naturally start to distance anyway. If you're not putting energy into it and fostering it, unless you're in that situation where they, it might be a group of 4 or 5 people and you're joining it, they're already there, then again, just don't be one-on-one with them. You can create that. And as you said, coming back to your circle of control, it's my thoughts, my beliefs, my values, my actions. This is what I have control over. Nothing else in life. Nothing else in life is in my control. But if I can own that center of control, then that doesn't affect me in the same way.
I also think there's this concept I thought about quite a bit, which is kind of this idea of a friend group culture.
Yes.
And that is something else you can control, is when things are happening, which maybe goes back all the way to our, are you going to have the hard conversations with your friends? When something is happening, let me give an example here. So let's say a friend of mine has a very big financial goal. They are saving up for a house.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a very positive thing. We want them to have the house that they want. They are excited about it. They are working hard towards this. And then we all go out to dinner. And while we're sitting at the table, people, they say, oh, well, I don't want to order a bunch of stuff. I don't want to do a big split group bill. I want to be here with everyone, but I'm just going to order the sandwich on the menu, but everyone else should do what they want. Or maybe they don't even say that and they're just trying to enjoy everybody's time, but not rack up their bill. Now, when the bill comes and then suddenly everybody's like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to split the bottle of wine you didn't even partake in? What are you doing here? That's what I mean about friendship culture, is if you're sitting there watching this happen and you're thinking to yourself, that person's being a bully, I don't like that, I'm going to distance myself. You also have the opportunity to say, hey, shouldn't we all be encouraging each other to go after what we want? And, so-and-so has this goal of saving up for a down payment, and we want to support that. We're happy they were here tonight. Now, that is something you can control, is speaking up. And when that happens, I bet you other people at the table wanted to say that.
Yes. The example you've just come is really given up.
Yeah. And then that's going to push the bully in that situation to realize this isn't acceptable. So they either need to fall in line and change and think about it, or this isn't going to fly and people are going to keep calling them out and it's going to get really uncomfortable.
And the only time I've seen that situation escalate is when people have had too much to drink,
mm-hmm.
and it becomes a stupid situation. But if you can do it in a mature way and you can say, hey, you may not have known, but actually Joe's got this goal at the moment and this is what's really important to her. So, maybe we can just leave that separate. That you can take a really mature approach, as you said, and there is definitely a group culture. Things happen when people get together that are different to when you get together one-on-one, and egos inflate sometimes. Courage is shared. Lots of different things happen when groups come together. And so if you are able to use that power of the group to say and step in, as you said, then you may not want to be the leader, but you could end up being, a bit of a leader in the group and setting the tone and setting the values and setting the experience for everybody else. And that is so powerful because you're de-sliming for everybody.
Or, even if you're not the leader, you are the one that's starting to set this precedent that the slime's not going to be allowed, that you want this to be an enjoyable space for everybody, and we're not going to do this anymore. And that means we're going to have to keep paying attention to how we're acting. We can't just do the same old things because we don't want the slime here.
Exactly.
This is a no. And for anybody that's listening, that's like, that sounds really nice, Alex. I have done this. I actually have an episode in the works about this friend group culture thing because I have multiple friend groups where this has happened. This is possible.
I've seen that happen lots of times. Yeah. And for different reasons. People have got babies at home and they don't want to partake in the wine, or, there's lots of different reasons this comes up, but it does happen. Or, you go for an activity and one person's not as courageous as others and doesn't want to do the full thing, wants to do the half thing. And, there's lots of reasons this can happen. And as you said, group culture, group thought, group mentality, it has its own power. And if you can use that in a positive way, then hats off. It's such a huge opportunity. The other thing I was thinking about when you were just talking before, sometimes we meet people maybe in the workplace or maybe in passing socially or something, and you think, oh, we have a great connection. We should catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you do catch up one-on-one, it can be a really ordinary experience.
Mm.
The mistake a lot of us make is to go for lunch or to go for a coffee, which puts a lot of pressure on that conversation. I'm using my hands here. Sorry, people. It puts a lot of pressure on the face-to-face, eye-to-eye conversation, which not everybody is okay with. So maybe the spring clean is actually to shift and not meet for a coffee or a lunch, but to go, hey, I need to walk the dog early in the morning. Do you want to come for a walk with me? Or do you want to go and check out the gallery together? Or do you want to – that can change the dynamic as well. And maybe it's just not the right person to be in a certain setting with, and doing something different can take that pressure off as well.
Yes. Our common thread here is that, yes, it might be the person that is not right. It also could be all these other factors that most people aren't really considering. And I really don't think that much reflection is necessary. You could probably think about this for 10 minutes while you're driving in the car or riding on your way to work one day. And it may not be the right solution right off the bat, but you probably can come up with something you could try, whether it is a new activity or a addition of a couple in the dynamic, or there is some way probably to shift this before just immediately cutting everybody out.
And I think what's really key, as we said at the start, is knowing and understanding and acknowledging that, and it could be a friend you've had for a long time. It might not be someone you just met, but because you've got married, you're going in different spaces, or because your kids are now at school, you're going in different spaces, or whatever it is. But knowing and acknowledging when the energy is off, it's okay to shift and realign. It's perfectly normal and it is okay, and you're not doing anything wrong. And if you do it the right way, we've given heaps of examples now, then you can do it without hurting anyone else's feelings as well.
I can give so many examples in recent years, right? I'm in my low 30s. People are married or have recently gotten married. Lots of new babies are happening. People are in places where certain people are childless, certain people are not. People are deep in their careers. People are moving away. Like, so much transition is happening. And I could have let so many friendships go. But instead, a lot of times, it's like, well, it's not the friendship. It's just trying to force our old ways to work in this new version. And it could be something as simple as friends moved away and we really thought to ourselves like, oh, we'll have regular FaceTime dates. And that just like doesn't work. So now we need to do one trip a year to meet up, and we stay in touch via Marco Polo.
And find different ways to do things like that.
And like suggesting like, hey, I know that this is another app you have to download, or like, I know PTO is limited. How can we figure out a way to meet up in person, whether it's here or there or in the middle, or like, what does that look like? And brainstorming ideas. But it's always like vulnerable to suggest those things. But if I hadn't, right, then that friendship would be covered in so much shame that I'm a bad friend, that something's wrong here, so much struggle. Like, why is this so hard? We've been friends for so long. So many feelings when in actuality, it's like, it's not the friendship. It's just that the ways we're approaching it don't work anymore.
And because we are always changing, we are always shifting, we outgrow scenarios and we outgrow what used to work. And we just have to find a way to adapt. And, the example you gave is brilliant, because voice messages, the power of sending someone a voice message is huge, especially if you can't be together, whether it's family or friends. There's great ways to maintain connections, but knowing in yourself that you're not doing anything wrong, that it's just a shift, it's just a realignment. And if people can listen now and understand that core concept, then you can deal with anything. It's just realignment. It's the spring clean. You're not always throwing everything out when you spring clean. Sometimes you're just rearranging.
Yeah.
Just moving stuff around, trying a different room for it, whatever it is.
The analogy is a really beautiful analogy, really, right? Because you normally kind of like take everything out. You kind of look at everything you have. You think about how it fits in your life. Do I really use that anymore? Oh, I used to love that foam roller thing. And now I haven't touched it in 9 months. Do I want to keep it? Do I want this? Maybe if I did it at night instead of in the morning, I would use it. Maybe not. Maybe you'll let it go. Like, really, this is actually hilarious. We do more thought for most people, I think, about the stuff in our house than we do about the relationships in our life. And yet people will tell you on repeat that like stuff is just stuff and the people matter, but we're not really thinking about it.
And if we stop for a minute and, as you said, just 5 minutes on your drive, reflect on it, and you go, oh my God. And it might be, hey, I really miss that person. I'm going to reach out to them and give them a call. And the times I've done that and we've reconnected, and then we, I love walking, which is why I keep using that. But, we go for a walk together and catch up and reconnect. I mean, I did that with someone I haven't spoken to in 2 years just recently. It was such a good feeling. We're like, why haven't we been doing this? There was lots of reasons, of course. But
well, yeah, but now you have this new opportunity to be like, okay, well, what does life look like right now? Can you walk regularly? How often can we do this? What times work? Do you need to walk and talk on the phone sometimes when you're traveling for work? I don't know what it is. But like, you can actually have that conversation now.
It doesn't have to be hard. But as you said, just invest a little bit of time, like you would with all your stuff at home. Just invest a little bit of time in your friendships. And it's amazing what can come from it. So if you take that spring cleaning analogy and go through your contact list, or, reflect on who you've been chatting to, or who did you see on social media recently, or whatever it is that, depending on how old you are, works for you. Think about it and think about who gives me good energy, who doesn't, who haven't I seen for a long time, what happened? COVID for a lot of us, and it's just reconnecting again because we came out of COVID in different directions. So what does it look like? And there will be people who are wrong and you just need to shake it off or let it go, but not everybody is, and just finding a way to make it work.
And just spending some time, any time, thinking about this, because I think that's the biggest thing is people are either taking action with no thought. They're not actually thinking about what's impactful, right? Like so many people say, oh, I don't have time for friends. It's like, well, do you not have time for friends? Or are you just honestly doing kind of like busy work when it comes to your friendships? You're just kind of out there throwing darts at the wall. If you actually took 5 to 10 minutes to think about what would actually work in that friendship, what would work for you right now, how you can set this up to work, right? You wouldn't be spending so much time doing things that don't feel fulfilling. Like you could get the alignment right.
And culturally, there are people, and it doesn't have to be, Asian versus Western culture or anything else, but culturally, depending on where you've been brought up, saying to someone, let's go for a walk together is actually not normal for everyone either. Mm-hmm. So, just that whole analogy of spring cleaning, if it's not working, try it differently.
Yeah.
Just try it differently. Give it a go, because we are all very good at making ourselves busy. I love how you said that. We're all very good at being busy, doing stuff with our stuff around the house. We just need those micro moments of reflection to say, actually, I need to connect. I need to get out. What does it look like for me? One client I was working with recently, he loves squash. I'm like, well, you must have a local squash club. When's their social evening? Go to their social evening. Try that. Oh, I find someone I like and then they're not there. Is it because you're going on a Saturday afternoon and they've got kids and now hockey season's in? Like, try different things. It's not always going to work the first time round, but pick it up, dust it off, try it again. There must be a way that you can make it work for you.
I love what you're saying about, like, just because you went at that one time to that squash club and it didn't perfectly align. Like, again, there's so many factors here. The time of year, there's so many things. Try a couple different variations before you just decide, like, oh, no.
No one wants to be my friend at squash. Everybody comes at friendship from different places. You can't even start to understand where the other person's coming from because it's not in your circle of control. So you've got to try at different times. Unless they're awful. Like we said, there are situations where you do not have anything more to do with someone. But actually, they're not that common. They're not that frequent. Normally, it's just the rub's wrong and you need to find a different way.
I guess in my mind, it's like if it really is that wrong, they probably wouldn't really be in your circle.
Yeah. I can think of 2 people that I've nah. And that's not easy. And with one of them, I lost other friends because of it. But that was a long time ago as well. And am I bitter, hurt? No.
Yeah. You got to let it go. Sorry. I don't mean like close friends. I mean like with meeting new people and acquaintances and like having nothing that you could even just have a simple conversation about. Are there truly people that, just absolute no? Yeah. But quite often if they're like in your circle somewhere, there's probably something there.
Yeah.
And you just haven't found it. You've been focused on the wrong thing.
It is really interesting because if you can always come back to who am I? What are my values? Where do I sit? You'll find a way to make things work every time, whether it's having another couple involved, whether it's never being one-on-one with that person, whatever it is, you can find ways to make it work. But I can't think of a situation in all the places I've lived recently where I met someone who really just, was out of this world, never ever going to talk to that person again because they're so wrong for me and my world. Because you tend to be in certain spaces, even meeting friends in India, your local Indian friends. That's not my world, but you end up with people with similar values, the PLUs, people like us. You end up in those spaces. So you tend to have something. If you can find the right rub, it will work.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was trying to say. It's like you're probably in these places for a reason. Like you're in the squash club because you care about your health. You are in a certain career field because you're passionate about this thing. Like sometimes there are definitely moments where like the values just will not align on a deep level. Yeah, let those go. But quite often, like there's probably something there that you can at least have some simple common thread conversation about.
Absolutely.
If you're in those same places. So, Emily, if there was something you were going to leave people with on this whole idea of spring cleaning and checking in, like maybe the one main takeaway, the most important thing, what would you want to leave the listeners with today?
Do you know, I think it comes down to being okay with shift and change and knowing that it's natural and it's going to happen and realigning yourself. It's okay. Do not beat yourself up. Do not worry that you've done it wrong. It's fine. It's normal. We all go through it.
I love that takeaway. Well, I just don't think we're talking enough about it. I think that we just need to say it plain and simple. Like life is changing.
Yeah.
It's not going to stay the same. We got to figure out how to navigate through the change.
And it's constant all through your life. So you're just navigating this next period and then it'll happen again and then again.
Well, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for being here. And you got some lucky clients.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a topic I'm really passionate about. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
So now, if you are inspired to do some reflection of your own, to spring clean some of your friendships or your connections, I want to just give you a couple aspects of your friendship that you might reflect on. These are based on that Roots of Friendship framework, episode 12. But some things you might want to reflect on would be the ways that you spend time together, right? Like the activities that you do with a friend, the mutual interests or topics that you talk about, the ways that you are comfortable spending time together. So that goes to the, like group dynamic or one-on-one. Change up the dynamics. Do you always go out in public to restaurants, or are you always at each other's houses? Think about some of that. Next would be the vulnerability piece, like the ways that you're opening up to each other. Maybe there's some things there that you don't want to share about anymore. For example, maybe you have a friend that it's just always really hard to talk about anything related to money. You don't want to do that anymore. And if you could just put some boundaries around not talking money, it would really let that friendship thrive. And then the final one are our beliefs about a friendship. And with that comes the expectations we have on a friendship, which I talk about on the podcast all the time. This idea that so often friendship is seen as this all or nothing thing. And if we can narrow in on what we actually expect from a friendship instead of expecting everything from them, it really can allow that friendship to thrive. So go check out episode 12 and maybe have some more thoughts when I see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @itsAlexAlexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.